Yes, John, if you can see the bouquets of flowers and the candles at the door of the Ramrod Bar, they're really symbols of the mourning, the feeling of mourning for the 2 dead and the others who've been shot down here on West Street, as are these little pieces of black armbands that are being handed out to various people in the area, and many of them are wearing it. And while there is a feeling of mourning, there's also a lot of anger, as people seem to be assembling at various other points for a number of demonstrations that have been scheduled, because many of the people here see it not just as an attack on the individuals that happen to be here, but as an attack on the gay community.
I was just walking down the street.
Richard Huff, recovering from bullet wounds in the shoulder and chest, recalled his first reaction after realizing he'd been shot.
My first reaction was just an intense anger, really, because it's that you just can't even walk down the street minding your own business.
Outside the hospital and on the streets where it happened, friends of the victims, as well as gays who didn't know them, vented their outrage and told of the constant threats homosexuals had to live with.
This is ridiculous! I want to live my life out. I don't want to be killed on these streets. It's ridiculous. I mean, you know what it is to be assaulted for just being alive. I mean, for being what you want to be.
This strip along West Street provides many New Yorkers with their only glimpse, and a fleeting one at that, of the gay world. Men walking arm in arm or kissing is not uncommon. And there are always a good number of homosexuals dressed in leather outfits.
At issue for Austin voters today is an amendment to the city's Fair Housing Code that reads, "It shall not be unlawful to deny housing on the basis of sexual orientation."
This is the day that the Lord has made.
Rallies of conservative religious groups have set the tone of the campaigning on this issue. They're mobilized against homosexuality. All of this got started when the city council tried to prohibit discrimination because of sexual preference. Last August, that prompted the largest turnout ever for an Austin City Council meeting, a backlash of resentment against homosexuals. Austin, a college town as well as the state capital, is generally recognized as the most liberal city in Texas. Gay people like Beth Epstein say the controversy is out of character for their town.
I mean, you can check out people's credit references and, you know, things that show whether or not they're responsible citizens, you know, but sexual orientation seems to me have nothing to do with that.
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer. Robert Bazell now in Atlanta.
Bobby Campbell of San Francisco and Billy Walker of New York both suffer from a mysterious newly discovered disease which affects mostly homosexual men, but has also been found in heterosexual men and women. The condition severely weakens the body's ability to fight disease. Many victims get a rare form of cancer called Kaposi sarcoma. Others get an infection known as pneumocystis pneumonia. Researchers know of 413 people who have contracted the condition in the past year. 1/3 have died and none have been cured.
Death didn't scare me. It was living with this for a long time. That's more frightening than death.
Investigators have examined the habits of homosexuals for clues.
I was in the fast lane at one time in terms of the way that I lived my life, and now I'm not.
The best guess is that some infectious agent is causing it.
Today, researchers here at the National Centers for Disease Control said they had found several cases where people who had been sex partners both had the condition. The scientists say this probably means they are dealing with some new, deadly, sexually transmitted disease.
The investigators see this as a serious public health problem.
From an epidemic point of view, there have been more deaths from Kaposi sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia than have occurred with all the cases of toxic shock syndrome and the Philadelphia outbreak of Legionnaire's disease combined.
Researchers are now studying blood and other samples from the victims, trying to learn what is causing the disease. So far, they have had no luck. Robert Bazell, NBC News, Atlanta.
This city has long been famous for its acceptance of different lifestyles. Now it would give that acceptance legal recognition by providing partners of city employees, married or not, homosexual or heterosexual, the same benefits now granted to married spouses. The legislation is further evidence of the power of the homosexual community here. From 15 to 20% of the population is gay. Homosexuals are considered the most effective political group in the city. The proposal is the brainchild of a gay city supervisor, Harry Britt, who hopes it will have an influence nationally.
The national implications are a recognition that the patterns of the family and the way people pair off in our society are changing very rapidly. This ordinance is not going to create any relationships. It's just going to acknowledge that they are there.
No supervisor opposed the idea on moral grounds, but Wendy Nelder said, to be fair, it should include other members of the household. Parents, in-laws, the whole family.
This legislation does the opposite of what everyone talks about. It promotes discrimination against people related by blood or marriage, and I don't believe in that.
Nobody knows what the proposal will cost, but it's expected to add about 3,000 people to the city's health plan.
The City Council had passed a bill that would have given health benefits to the unmarried partners of city workers. It also permitted gay couples to get a form of a marriage license. The idea had popular support, but the Catholic diocese strongly opposed it, saying the bill endorsed homosexuality. And the mayor said the proposal had administrative problems.
In order to defend for me, I've got to believe that what I've got is the right document for this city. This is not the document that I can go out and defend.
There were no incidents at the demonstration, but the rhetoric was angry.
If we believe our relationships are valid and equal to the one you have, Dianne Feinstein, to that degree, we're going to throw you out, and you're not going to be mayor of this city.
A cacophony of boos, cheers, stamping feet, and clapping hands filled the City Council chambers since 9 this morning. 200 people signed up to speak before the City Council's General Welfare Committee, some for the gay rights bill, some against.
Like the Jews in Hitler's Germany, it was happening to others and not to me. I didn't realize the discrimination I was facing was subtle.
If the gay rights bill passes, our schools will be infiltrated by flaunting sodomite teachers. School children will not only be exposed to this wicked abomination, but will be seduced in mass by these perverted teachers.
City Council President Carol Bellamy, who's one of the bill's sponsors, noted that 40 cities across the country and one state, Wisconsin, have passed laws banning discrimination of homosexuals.
It is astonishing to me that we have deliberated for so many years and with so much acrimony about legislation which simply extends to individuals of a certain group the essential civil liberties that every other citizen in our city is entitled to enjoy. I urge you to vote this bill to the full council.
A victim of AIDS, a homosexual who was told to take a leave from his job.
I heard through the grapevine that, there were people that were, nervous about my being around.
When you got AIDS, did it make you think again about being gay? Did it make you rethink that lifestyle? Did it make you regret anything you've done up there?
No, I have absolutely no regrets. I do not feel guilty about anything that I've done. If anything, I become angry that so little has been done, in the sense that, I don't think the government and the medical profession's full efforts have been put towards the solution of this problem.
We have a disease here which is new, which was not here a decade ago, and we have no cure. And worse than that is that the mortality rate is really astronomical.
But at weekly meetings on AIDS, the doctors tell other hospital workers there is no danger if the proper precautions are followed.
There's a lot of panic being spread. Nobody has come down with AIDS from breathing the air. That's number one. Nobody has come down with AIDS who's been a hospital worker.
There are 5 people that I know personally and closely that have died since last summer.
Thousands of gay men and women marched down New York's Fifth Avenue in the 14th annual Gay Pride Parade. 700 police were on hand to prevent any clashes, but the only clashes were verbal.
Jesus loves you. He hates your sin.
While the theme of this parade has always been gay liberation and gay pride, the emphasis this year was an appeal for funding to help stop the spread of the AIDS disease. The cause of the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS, is unknown, and there is no known cure. The deadly disease has been mostly striking homosexual men. More than 700 cases have been reported in New York, 1,600 in the country.
I'm angry because there hasn't been enough research for AIDS, enough funding, and gay people are suffering, and it's outrageous.
AIDS is not God's vengeance upon the homosexual community.
At New York St. John the Divine, the Reverend Paul Moore pleaded for reason. So while gay marchers were appealing for liberation, they were also appealing for compassion. Norma Quarles, NBC News, New York.
Gay Freedom Day in San Francisco, a not-so-silent minority turns majority and takes to the streets.
Oh, I should turn over the hello.
Above all else, observers and participants call this a celebration of sexual freedom. The parade wound on for hours, a spectacle even Barnum and Bailey might envy. Men, women, those in between, all tempered this year by an overriding concern about AIDS.
Homosexuals say AIDS victims are being discriminated against, evicted by landlords, and feared by health workers.
I have 4 friends that have died. I have 2 friends that are dying. I listen to them. Brilliant people. Brilliant people.
Gay marchers say they're looking for understanding, research money, and support in finding a cure for the disease, AIDS.
While Reverend Falwell prepared to release his guidelines for curbing AIDS, homosexuals protested outside. Falwell claims too much emphasis has been put on finding a cure and not enough on preventing the spread of the disease from the gay community to heterosexuals.
Why haven't federal health authorities moved against AIDS with the same swiftness and dispatch with which they moved against toxic shock syndrome, extra-strength Tylenol, and Legionnaire's disease?
Accusing the entire system, sir, of failing to respond with the same speed and the same commitment that might have been its motivation if those persons who are vulnerable to AIDS were in fact a member of another sociological group, sir.
This is not a political issue. This is a health issue. This is not a gay issue. This is a human issue. And I came here today in the hope that my epitaph would not read that I died of red tape.
Former Congressman Bauman was brought to the American Bar Association meeting by Dan Bradley, the former head of the Legal Services Corporation, who acknowledged 2 years ago that he was gay. Bauman came to drum up support for a proposal to urge states and cities to enact laws barring discrimination against homosexuals in jobs and housing.
We are as much a part of America as anyone else, and we mean to be treated as citizens in full partnership. Yes, I am still a political conservative, and yes, I am gay. So what? That's not in my text, but it's sort of fit in there. So what? What difference does it make?
Bradley made his own pitch before the ABA's governing House of Delegates.
We're not asking you to approve of homosexuality. All that we're asking you to do is to vote in support of a resolution that ends discrimination against 25 million gay men and women.
But the ABA gave the matter only 20 minutes.
I find it highly offensive. Its passage would give our profession a malodor in my town, in my state, and most of America.
Please say aye. In the end, the vote was closer than anyone expected. The proposal to protect the rights of gays was defeated 134 to 158. Former Congressman Bauman and others said they would be back next year to try again.
In Houston and many other cities, gays have demonstrated such clout that politicians now court them. Local candidates toured Houston's gay bars before the last election. After declaring victory, Houston Mayor Kathy Whitmire's only stop was by a gay bar to say thank you. That political power has prompted unprecedented competition and more than a few acrobatics among Democratic presidential contenders. Walter Mondale once refused even to meet with gays. Now he tells gay audiences he will champion their rights.
The Democratic Party commits itself to prohibit discrimination in employment on the basis of sexual orientation and to eliminate all laws, rules, and regulations which discriminate against individuals on the basis of sexual orientation. I support that platform, and as I said, it was adopted overwhelmingly.
Jesse Jackson once suggested that the disease AIDS was God's way of punishing homosexuality. Now he supports a gay civil rights bill.
All of us are God's children. There can be no basis for denying civil rights or civil liberties. Public policy must protect personal preference.
I think they are coming around because the gays and the lesbians are now very effective politically, are becoming a real force in American politics.
At the 1980 Democratic Convention, there were 77 openly gay delegates, a block larger than the delegations of 25 states. Some expect that number to triple in 1984. Gays also are willing to donate both money and time to campaigns, and their ability to turn out votes surpasses many more traditional political groups.
The bottom line for any candidate is not goodness, truth, and light, much as we'd like to think that. The bottom line for any candidate is this community strong enough and viable enough to either damage my candidacy or assist my candidacy?
Senator John Glenn learned just how viable the gay community is. While opposing harassment of homosexuals, Glenn refused to support the gay rights legislation.
It just wouldn't be right, nor do I think it would be acceptable in most communities across this country.
I think it hurts him in the Democratic Party. I don't think it helps him one whit with the general electorate out there.
Richard Longstaff cannot become an American because he is gay. The Immigration Service says the Texas businessman who came from England 18 years ago is of good moral character. But the government and many courts routinely block citizenship for gays on the ground that homosexuals suffer from a mental defect defined in the law as psychopathic personality. Today, a gay rights group took the Longstaff case to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Our organization feels that this law is irrational. It serves no legitimate government purpose. Our government has said to Richard Longstaff, you're not good enough to be an American citizen.
The veto came after the most intense lobbying effort ever seen in California. More than 75,000 letters arrived in the governor's office, and there were so many phone calls, extra lines had to be installed.
Well, I think this is a really important bill, and it's a complicated issue, and I think...
The calls were 35-1 against the bill, part of an aggressive campaign organized by fundamentalist Christians. They argued that the bill, which would prohibit employers from discriminating against gays, would give legal sanction to the homosexual lifestyle. Proponents of the bill worked for years to finally get it through the state legislature. It passed with only one vote to spare. Governor George Deukmejian listened to arguments from both sides, then said he decided there was insufficient evidence of discrimination against gays to justify the bill. His veto triggered a demonstration by several hundred gays last night in San Francisco's Castro district. Gay leaders vowed they would continue the fight.
We will get it through the Assembly again, we will get it through the Senate again, and we'll put it on that man's desk one more time.
David Burrington, NBC News, San Francisco.
And while labor was marching in one direction, gays and other homosexual rights supporters were marching in another in San Francisco. Police had to change one parade route to make sure that the two contingents didn't meet. "20% of the San Francisco voters are gay. That's major political power."
Hey,
Good five.
thank you. This saves my life. I can't believe...
Police officers Robert Miller and John Land, both are gay.
That is incredible.
Look at those glasses.
We were once very, very weak, and now we are beginning to be strong. But we never forget our weakness. We never forget all of the pain of a society that does not understand and does not want to hear.
Harry Britt, who is gay, was appointed and then re-elected by more than 100,000 votes to the Board of Supervisors.
All of the Jerry Falwells of the world, all of the people who are trying to say, these are bad people, you should be afraid of them, they haven't been able to get rid of us. And in fact, what has happened is that we find we're so much a part of things.
100,000 men, women, and men who looked like women marched, sang, chanted for gay rights and lesbian rights and almost every right conceivable. It was not a protest as much as it was a love fest.
The only tense moment was when the bystanders and the marchers couldn't agree on who was going to be saved. Gay leaders say they are pleased with the proposed Democratic platform. It's the laws and attitudes of the rest of the country and the world that causes them to march.
Let this march be a message throughout the nation. Homophobia, the hatred of one's own gender, has no future in this land.
What this was a demonstration against Ronald Reagan. He wasn't here, but those who were are sure he'll get the message. Not so sure he'll listen. John Severson, NBC News, San Francisco.
I simply would like you to explain to these people tonight, as you have refused to do for a year, why your relationship with a teenage page would be any different than a sexual relationship between a teacher and a student.
Representative Jerry E. Studs be censured.
Studs was censured by the House last summer for his sexual relationship with a 17-year-old male congressional page. At that time, Studs announced publicly he is a homosexual.
That's the easiest question I've ever been asked. There wasn't anything right about it. It was a damn stupid and inappropriate thing to do, and I never said anything else.
It's the main issue in Tuesday's primary, and Studs, the only open homosexual in Congress, hopes to face down that issue with honesty. This is the Gay and Lesbian Caucus of the Democratic Party of Texas.
We're not an ignored faction any longer. We've become an issue in this campaign. We're an issue in the U.S. Senate race. Everyone here knows that.
By golly, the Texas spirit is we don't deny people an opportunity for employment, to advance on the basis of what they do in their personal lives.
At the Democratic convention, Doggett used Graham's radio ads in a pitch for his own fundraiser.
We need your dollars as well as your time to respond to the trashiest set of radio commercials in the greatest line-buy campaign this state has ever seen.
The Republicans say the homosexual issue is extremely polarizing in Texas, so Texans will be hearing more of the same on the radio.
Well, in 1976, I was a volunteer for this organization, attempting to get a gay rights plank and the Democratic platform. We lobbied extensively, and essentially at an open meeting in Washington, D.C., during the construction of the actual platform, I was thrown out of an open meeting. I was literally barred from attending an open meeting, and the explanation was that this issue of gay and lesbian rights was, quote, an embarrassment to candidate Carter. In 1980, on the other hand, I was a Carter appointee to the platform committee, and subsequent to getting a plank in the Democratic Party platform, I was asked when we could produce 77 delegates to the Democratic convention if I wouldn't go on the road on behalf of Carter Mondale, touching base with the gay and lesbian community around the country. I think what happened, in very, very simple language, but probably accurate language, is that the Democrats learned how to count. Politicians have to learn how to count.
The baths were ordered closed when city inspectors found evidence of sexual practices which they felt led to the spread of AIDS. Owners of 5 of the bathhouses plan to fight the order in court.
This Oklahoma school teacher could be fired just for talking about it.
I don't really think that it's going to encourage those kids to become homosexual just because I am.
Oklahoma passed a law prohibiting teachers from doing anything, even outside the classroom, that promotes or encourages homosexual behavior. That limit on their private lives will be argued in the Supreme Court today.
The law we're talking about prohibits conduct that would be contrary to the parents' beliefs. It also be as contrary to what the Bible says.
It is really a muzzle on teachers. And if they can do it with regard to this particular subject matter, controversial though it is, they can do it with regard to any subject matters.
The Supreme Court has never accepted the idea that there are gay rights protected by the Constitution. But on a tie vote, it knocked out an Oklahoma law that prohibited school teachers from doing anything that encouraged homosexual behavior.
You know, I can't come out and be active in any of the gay marches or any of the gay activities that go on in Oklahoma City.
You're muzzled?
Very much so.
The Supreme Court agreed with the lower court that the law violated the free speech rights of teachers, both gay and straight. One author of the law disagreed, saying children have to be protected from sympathetic views of homosexual conduct.
It's what Freud has called perversion, and what the U.S. Supreme Court has called clearly deviant activity.
This is the first time homosexual groups have won anything at the Supreme Court. Carl Stern, NBC News, Washington.
The proposed ordinance has created an ugly political brawl and brought out a high turnout of voters to the polls. Supporters say its purpose is to prevent sexual discrimination in hiring for city jobs, but opponents have turned it into a fight over the homosexual lifestyle. Mayor Kathy Whitmire supports the measure.
What it's designed to accomplish is to say once and for all that when people come in to apply for a city job, that they cannot be quizzed about their private lawful sexual activities.
We don't want any of this trash. The ordinance has widespread opposition, creating a strange alliance. The KKK, as well as many black ministers, bankers, doctors, and lawyers, have all campaigned to defeat the bill.
If this referendum passed, I think it would damage Houston's image substantially, much in the way that San Francisco's image has been damaged.
Opponents say giving gays legal protection will give them more power and influence, and that could turn Houston into a homosexual mecca. The gays say all they want is job protection.
Donald Babbitts and David Jean are openly gay, and for 2 weeks they were foster parents. They had just begun expanding their home to accommodate 2 battered young boys when a newspaper reporter got wind of it. Within hours, the state removed the children, citing potentially damaging publicity.
Damn it, I'm just as good as the rest of you.
They are fighting to get the children back.
Our home is no different than any other. It is filled with warmth, honesty, human dignity, and most importantly, Christian love and understanding.
Embarrassed officials now are frantically trying to come up with a policy which will make Massachusetts the first state in the nation to declare whether gays should or shouldn't be foster parents. The Chief Justice of the Juvenile Court says that regardless of what's decided, he'll resist placing children in gay homes.
And children need adults that they can relate to in a normal fashion. That is not a normal situation. I don't care how you define it, it's not normal.
The problem is that there aren't nearly enough traditional families like this one to take care of a sharp increase in foster children. A growing number of homosexuals want to be parents and are adopting quietly to avoid unleashing prejudices and fears which many experts say aren't supported by the facts.
It is not true that most gays produce gays, or most gays solicit, seduce, and try very heavily to make other people into being as gay as possible.
We have no evidence that you can correlate sexual preference with competency as a parent or foster parent.
Dan Gumbleton is gay and raised 4 straight daughters.
I don't think it was any different. It's just normal. Average family with our normal problems and normal happiness.
But because there isn't much scientific data and because parents serve as models, some psychiatrists warn that placing children in gay homes is a gamble.
I would be concerned about gay parents, particularly with younger children who have not formed their sexual identification or their gender identity.
Well, I went in to get my paycheck, and they said, geez, we have bad news, you're fired.
Some have lost their job because of AIDS, others who didn't.
I asked if there was a mistake. I didn't have AIDS. I knew a friend who did. There was no mistake. There was a fear of AIDS.
Ambulance drivers have refused to take AIDS patients on occasion.
He asked one of the attendants, he told him that I had AIDS, and the person said outright, I'm not touching him. Just like that.
And hospital workers have refused to take care of AIDS patients.
There's one crisis counselor at the Gay Men's Health Crisis who went 3 times a day to the hospital to feed his patient and wash him, bathe him, because the hospital had him in such isolation that nobody would go into his room.
Even the federal government has been accused of discrimination by lack of funding for research.
Hudson died in his sleep at 9 this morning at his $3 million home in Beverly Hills. The actor had returned to his home in late August after having been told by doctors his health was too poor for any experimental therapy for AIDS. This was his last public appearance on July 15th of this year. Some publicity shots with Doris Day. At this point, he had known for a year he had AIDS. A week later, he flew to Paris for treatment, and the world knew it.
Nothing could be done. He came home to die. A frightened Hollywood began raising money to fight AIDS. Hudson was too sick to attend last month's fundraising gala, but his statement was read by actor Burt Lancaster.
I'm not happy that I have AIDS. But if that is helping others, I can at least know that my own misfortune has had some positive worth.
Today, gays and others praised Hudson for having gone public with his disease.
I think the man did more for us in the gay community in the last few months than maybe we've done for ourselves in a long, long time.
San Francisco has more cases of AIDS per capita than any other city. The number of new victims, almost all of them homosexual men, had been doubling every year. But since January, the rate has held steady at about 62 new cases a month. That's unprecedented.
But we've been waiting 4 years now for some evidence that the epidemic might be coming under control, and this is the first real glimmer of hope we've had.
If the epidemic has peaked, experts give credit to a prevention campaign over the past 2 years. The message, avoid risky sex and you'll avoid AIDS. In gay areas, people are recruited to attend seminars.
It hit me one week, actually, friend number 18 died.
Gay bathhouses, blamed for encouraging high-risk sex, were shut down by the city a year ago, but most had already closed for lack of customers. Business at gay bars has dropped by a third. So many homosexual men were infected with the AIDS virus before the change in lifestyle that unsafe sex is more dangerous than ever.
One contact now is as dangerous as 10 contacts were 4 years ago.
Other cities are applying the lessons learned in San Francisco. New York and Los Angeles are trying to discourage high-risk sex. A growing number of gay bathhouses have converted to health clubs. This one in Miami serves health food and caters to a growing number of gays who've become health fanatics out of fear they may have the AIDS virus. They hope to avoid the disease itself by bolstering the immune system. David Burrington, NBC News, San Francisco.
Homosexuality is a sin.
It was California Republican William Dannemeyer who recently declared on the House floor, God's plan for man was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Dannemeyer leads a group of conservative Republicans who hope to make AIDS a political issue. They meet to plan strategy for bringing controversial AIDS-related legislation to the House floor.
At some point, the public is going to demand action, frankly, to get on with protecting the public health.
Many Republican politicians believe voters eventually will reward them if they act early and aggressively against AIDS.
We want to identify every person who's a carrier. We want to identify every possible way to stop them from spreading the disease, and we want to be open and honest about this disease before it becomes a really serious national health threat.
Bathhouses frequented by homosexual men. The House already has voted overwhelmingly to close them if federal authorities believe they help spread AIDS. But more controversial are proposals to find and segregate those exposed to AIDS, to prohibit those with AIDS from working in health care, to make it a felony for those in an AIDS high-risk group to knowingly donate blood, and to prohibit children with AIDS from attending school. In New York City, a Republican campaign proposal to close all businesses that cater mainly to homosexual men. Also, mandatory blood tests for doctors, nurses, teachers, food handlers, and prostitutes.
I fear there are a lot of people who have been strongly against the gay community and would like to use this terrible tragedy of AIDS as a basis for coming in and showing how strongly they are against the gay community.
I think it is one more instance of fag bashing.
Last weekend, Daryl Yates' wrist predicted that the mine shaft would close. He had started going to the gay backroom bar 10 years ago. But Saturday night, Rist went as a journalist, the last stop on a tour he had taken of city gay bathhouses to see if patrons were avoiding fellatio and sodomy as required by state law. At the mine shaft, Rist says he saw several encounters he suspected were violations. But he points out they involved maybe a half dozen of 400 men who had packed the bar that night.
The men who come here who aren't well read about the disease are going to meet men here who are. It's a peer education. They're going to be educated by their peers. This place is not selling death any more than the heterosexual clubs are selling death. None of these clubs wants their clientele to die, and no gay man in this city wants to die, nor does he want his friends and lovers to die.
Every year for 15 years, the New York City Council has considered a homosexual rights bill and then rejected it. But this year's bill, introduced by Mayor Koch, is more specific than past proposals, outlawing discrimination against gays in housing, jobs, and commercial transactions.
Justice delayed is justice denied. This legislation will provide simple justice, justice too long denied.
The campaign has become one of the most bitter in City Council history. Some council members say they have been subjected to threatening calls and hate mail in an attempt to get them to kill the bill.
And they attack me personally, they attack my ethnicity, they attack my sexuality, those kinds of things, which, basically we ignore and attribute that to ignorance.
Civil rights protections for gays is needed because there is so much hatred and persecution of gay people in our society.
We're going to see them going out and publicizing their lifestyle and influencing our children.
Catholic and Jewish leaders have gotten involved.
We strongly believe that such a result would seriously undermine the moral education and values of our youth and the stability of family in our society.
But not all religious leaders are against the legislation.
Passage of this bill is a simple and urgent matter of justice.
Similar bills have already been passed in 70 cities and counties around the country. But in Miami, with the help of anti-gay activist Anita Bryant, and in Houston, with strong support from the Christian right, their gay rights measures were repealed. In New York, both sides vow to fight if they lose tomorrow. Jennifer McLogan, NBC News, New York.
Supporters of the bill have battled for 15 years to reach victory. Their celebration after last night's vote was not dampened today by threats of facing another battle, this time in court. To these supporters of the measure, the 21-14 victory is the start of better days for the city's gay community.
What it does, first of all, for gay men and women is to lift the veil of fear under which they have lived for many decades in the city. AIDS has finally proven to people, to many people who otherwise did not know, that there is real discrimination against people who are gay.
The gay rights community faces its biggest challenge as the Supreme Court hears argument today on laws in Georgia and about half the states that prohibit anal and oral sex.
There's only one sexual act which is legal in the state of Georgia, and everything else can get you 20 years.
Under pressure from the gay community, many states did away with such laws. But there's a new debate about keeping them because of AIDS.
We know to a certainty that AIDS is transmitted in great measure by homosexual conduct. The thought of removing that statute from the books, which prohibits homosexual conduct, does not seem all that timely to me.
You criminalize the conduct, people won't report, people will lie. There will be no capacity to deal with the spread of the disease.
Gay leaders in Atlanta challenged the law after a man was arrested in his bedroom. But gay rights activists claim the sodomy laws could also affect 80% of married couples and say the case is really about sexual privacy. The Justice Department says federal law does not prohibit the firing of potentially millions of workers who may be carrying the AIDS virus. The opinion was reached by Assistant Attorney General Charles Cooper, who said carriers who might spread the disease are not handicapped workers whom the law protects.
There is a distinction between a handicap and the ability to communicate a disease.
Gay rights groups were angry.
It's a subterfuge for discrimination. That's all. It's based on irrational fears.
It certainly reinforces the false notion that AIDS can be spread casually and will give some employers the rationalization that they're looking for to discriminate, despite everything that scientists have said.
rights activists who just yesterday celebrated Gay Pride Day across the U.S. today suffered their worst defeat. In a case from Georgia, the Supreme Court said the Constitution gives no right to homosexuals to engage in sodomy, anal or oral sex.
Certainly the statute is on the books, and any statute that is on the books as a criminal statute of this state should be enforced, and that's what it's for.
All of us have fundamental rights that are at stake here. The right not to have Big Brother enter the bedroom is a right that I would have hoped a majority of the court would vindicate.
Gay rights supporters were stunned.
I think this is a blatant example of judicial bigotry.
Today's decision strikes an enormous blow against the principle of sexual privacy, whether that principle is applied to heterosexual Americans or homosexual Americans.
Gay rights advocates said they would continue to seek repeal of state anti-sodomy laws and would further challenge the Georgia law for singling out homosexuals for prosecution. Carl Stern, NBC News, Washington.
Demonstrators in San Francisco called the ruling frightening, saying it makes love and intimacy among homosexuals illegal. Writing for the majority, Justice Byron White says sex between homosexuals is not protected by the Constitution, and states can regulate it if they want to. The gay groups say they will now work to change the sodomy laws in 24 states.
They were protesting an appearance by Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who voted with the majority last month in upholding a Georgia law making sodomy a crime. Police in riot gear stood by during the demonstration, but there wasn't any trouble. In her speech, Justice O'Connor said, because someone must win and someone must lose, there will always be someone unhappy with the court's rulings.
Joe Stanley is one of the hospital's first patients. He says at last he's being treated like a victim instead of a social outcast.
It's very reassuring to know that finally we have stopped classifying AIDS as a gay disease. We're now having to look at it as being a disease for people and persons.
I declare this Institute for Immunological Disorders open.
There's no place like it in the world, a hospital devoted exclusively to the treatment of and research on AIDS. The facility will be operated by the American Medical Corporation and MD Anderson Hospital. Officials say they will offer medical treatment and counseling.
Fully half of San Francisco's 80,000 gay men already may carry the AIDS antibody. Since 1981, there have been 1,400 AIDS deaths here. Ward 5A, San Francisco General Hospital, specializes in the treatment of AIDS patients. The system here has become a model for the treatment of AIDS all over the world.
San Francisco AIDS Foundation can help you.
And there are a large number of public and private organizations in San Francisco specifically designed to assist people who already have AIDS and to prevent others from getting it. But many city and state leaders think that Proposition 64 goes too far, so they held a dinner recently to raise funds to campaign against it. The No on 64 camp says the proposition will undo all of the work that they've done to combat AIDS, that it will lead to mass screening and detention, that it will cost billions of dollars and accomplish nothing.
This initiative will increase the fear, increase the anxiety that people have, because it will assume, and the public will assume, that this is an easily contracted disease that is spread like the flu, like measles that keeps kids out of school, like chicken pox. It isn't.
Mayor Feinstein, does the success of Proposition 64 getting on the California ballot indicate to you that there is greater fear out there about AIDS than you may have anticipated?
Well, I think there is fear, and I think what 64 does is capitalize on it. It's not helpful and it's not constructive, and nothing positive happens if it passes. But I think what we ought to do in this is really listen to the health people. Listen to those people who are trained and skilled in communicable disease. Keep politics out of it and take that advice.
One of them, out of nowhere, smashed my friend in the face with his fist. His glasses shattered, blood went everywhere. And then they started to hit me. I guess there were 3 or 4 of them. And they were hitting me until someone pulled them off and they ran off the trolley.
One was right behind me and struck me, throwing me to the ground, and stuck a knife in my back, while the other one shouted, "Clear, clear," and they both ran laughing down the street.
Cleveland Steve Jones and Mark Ostfield are homosexual, both victims of an increase in anti-gay violence that many contend is being fueled by fear of AIDS. Many gays say they now travel in groups, fearing that walking alone might increase their chances of being attacked. In October, during unprecedented hearings on the subject in Washington, lawmakers tried to determine whether there was a need for new laws to protect homosexual rights.
The subject of violence among gays and lesbians is a serious one to attract our attention. That the lawlessness that flows out of that is something that's of concern to everybody.
The FDA's approval of AZT today is one of the quickest approval actions on record and will make the drug available to the 14,000 AIDS victims who can be helped by it.
But I would expect that certainly within 2 weeks from today, patients will be able to begin taking Retrovir under this system.
So it is a big step, but again, it's not a cure. But that's part of the process of coming forth with a cure, and hopefully other drugs will come about or vaccinations that will just complement this.
White House officials felt that the president had to speak out because the disease has become the nation's overwhelming health concern. Even his own doctor, John Hutton, urged Mr. Reagan to pay more attention to the problem.
Our battle against AIDS has been like an emergency room operation. We've thrown everything we have into it. We've declared AIDS public health enemy #1.
Mr. Reagan said prevention is better than a cure. He sided with his education secretary, William Bennett, and other conservatives who say that the government should not provide sex education to children.
The federal role must be to give educators accurate information about the disease. Now, how that information is used must be up to schools and parents, not government.
The Surgeon General disagrees strongly, believing that children should be taught about condoms and given explicit sex education.
We can no longer afford to sidestep frank, open discussions about sexual practices, heterosexual and homosexual.
I don't quarrel with that, but I think that abstinence has been lacking in much of the education.
That angers some critics.
Until the Reagan administration realizes that the government's responsibility is saving lives and not saving souls, we will continue to see the virus spread through our society.
White House officials confirm that the president has never talked with his Surgeon General about AIDS or read the report Dr. Koop sent him last October.
The fact that it has taken the president 5 years to begin to even address this problem publicly demonstrates that this administration hasn't given it the level of commitment that it deserves.
Gay rights groups in Colorado say they will avoid a new AIDS reporting law by setting up clandestine laboratories and using doctors who will not report their names and addresses to the state health department. The Colorado legislature has passed, and the governor is expected to sign shortly, the bill which allows for criminal prosecution of doctors who fail to turn in the names of people who have AIDS or test positive for the virus. The American Civil Liberties Union says a court challenge of the new law is likely. Roger O'Neill, NBC News, Denver.
Meanwhile, there's another controversy over the president's plan to appoint a commission on AIDS. Advisors say Mr. Reagan does not intend to appoint any gays. Top researchers say that's an outrage and that they will boycott the commission. Gay activists say the White House is more concerned with right-wing politics than public health.
To exclude the gay community from a presidential commission on AIDS is the moral equivalent of excluding the Jewish community from a commission on the Holocaust.
I've had people say, oh, well, now we understand why you were concerned about gay rights. Well, I'm very proud of the fact that my voting record on women's issues is a pretty good one. And I think it would be a lousy world if the only people who were concerned about mistreatment or discrimination were the victims of it. Good to see you. Stay can't get on television. Well? Doing good? Good. Thank you. The hearing of the subcommittee on
This is not by any means a single-issue politician. He's fought for blacks, the elderly, for health care and affordable housing, against administration policy in Nicaragua, and he's obviously won the respect of his peers. But that this past week has been an emotional strain for Barney Frank was obvious when he thanked members of the Gay Political Task Force for their help.
I just want to thank all the people in this room who just made this possible for me. Long note, because what I thought was going to be a very tough time turned out to be a surprisingly easy one.
Whether by breakthrough or steady progress, we will beat this disease.
His commission includes experts from many fields, including geneticist Dr. Frank Lilly, who is also a gay activist.
Lilly acknowledges that probably was a major factor in his selection, but he denies it's the only reason he was chosen.
If I'm a token gay, I'm also a token biomedical researcher, and everybody else on the commission is a token something.
This huge quilt that today is being spread out on the Capitol Mall in Washington has 2,000 panels, every one crafted by the friends and relatives of an AIDS victim. This memorial, the size of 2 football fields, is the brainchild of San Franciscan Cleve Jones.
So we want to show the President and the Congress and the rest of the country the enormity of this epidemic. And with our quilt, we hope to show that enormity by providing people with a glimpse of the faces that are behind all of the statistics.
To date, the AIDS virus has claimed over 24,000 lives, the majority homosexual men.
Gay people in this country are aware that we are always threatened by physical violence and that the potential for discrimination in housing and employment is always there. The unfortunate thing now is that this epidemic is being exploited by preachers and politicians of the far right who deliberately are inflaming ignorance and hysteria against gay people under the guise of concern about an epidemic.
No more delays on AIDS discrimination. No more delays on equal justice for lesbians and gay men. No more delays.
America is not a blanket, all one color, of uncut cloth, all red, or white, or blue. America is a quilt made up of many patches, many pieces, many colors, many sizes, many textures, but everybody fits. Everybody counts. Everybody must have equal protection under the law in the real America.
More than 600 demonstrators crossed police lines to protest and to be arrested on the steps of the Supreme Court, the largest number of arrests ever at the court. Altogether, there were about 3,000 demonstrators from 25 states. The demonstration ended 4 days of protest in the Capitol over alleged inadequate programs to combat AIDS or to provide full rights for homosexuals. When Sergeant Perry Watkins tried to re-enlist after 15 years in the Army, he was rejected because he admitted having homosexual tendencies. He had freely said so in his enlistment application when he joined the Army. Now a federal appeals court in San Francisco has ruled that the military's fear of homosexual conduct is not enough to justify discrimination. Gay rights lawyers called it a major victory.
The court is stepping in and saying, you've gone too far. And I think that's a major breakthrough for us.
The decision sets the stage for an important Supreme Court ruling. In a 1980 appeals court case, Kennedy ruled that the Navy could kick out homosexuals. The Pentagon minimized today's ruling, noting that other courts have decided differently. An appeal is expected. If the decision sticks, more gays might join the military.
The practical effect will be that more lesbians and gay men will now feel free to sign up to join the military, to serve their country, and those that are in the service will feel more comfortable with who they are, that they won't be subject to witch hunts.
The court said a law which gives the CIA the right to fire employees with no reason given did not shield the government from lawsuits alleging discrimination against gays.
Here, for the first time that we're aware, the court has in fact limited the powers of the Director of Central Intelligence.
Traditionally, officials have worried that gays might be blackmailed into giving away secrets. Gay rights groups have mobilized against the CIA policy.
When you sign up to work for the Central Intelligence Agency, you shouldn't sign away your basic civil rights.
A decision prohibiting government agencies from firing gays could have its biggest impact on the military, which last year dismissed 1,300 homosexuals. Carl Stern, NBC News at the Supreme Court.
Our
A rally today outside his courthouse drew some 300 people, including members of the Dallas Gay Alliance. Complaints about the judge have also been filed with the Texas Human Rights Foundation, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the National Lawyers Guild.
There was another rally Tuesday outside Dallas City Hall to protest the actions of District Judge Jack Hampton. Hampton admitted sentencing a killer to a shorter prison term because his two victims were homosexuals. Several gay groups have filed formal petitions with state judicial authorities demanding that Hampton be fired.
It is one of the largest parades in New York. Similar parades took place today in San Francisco and other cities. It celebrates the night 20 years ago when gays literally burst out of the closet, went public. They saw no shame in being homosexual and demanded respect from a heterosexual society that had largely ignored them.
Of the 3,200 volunteers in the San Francisco-based test, those so mildly affected they had no symptoms of AIDS and given AZT showed resilience fighting the disease.
We know from this study quite clearly that there will be a delay in progression significantly greater than for individuals who do not take the drug.
The gay community, the most affected by AIDS, has been slow to embrace testing for the virus, fearing a witch hunt. For the first time, the number of AIDS cases passed the 100,000 mark. And there are estimates by the end of 1992, 263,000 Americans will be killed by this disease.